The committee welcomes you to our second hour presentation on protecting our oceans. I would like to just take a moment to remind everyone to keep themselves muted during the presentation. We are recording this in order to share it with those in the congregation unable to attend right now. There will be an opportunity at the end to talk and ask questions with our presenter, Jason. And now, Terry, I'd like for you to unmute and you can introduce our guest speaker. And thank you all for attending.
Okay, well, it is my great pleasure to introduce Jason D'Onofrio. He is a native of Phoenix, Arizona, with a decade of experience fundraising, organizing, and coordinating public campaigns. He's the External Relations Officer for the Ocean Foundation. After graduating college, Jason went on to work for public advocacy and environmental organizations in Arizona, Maryland, Vermont, and Colorado, leading teams as large as 60 in crucial campaigns affecting environmental conservation, civic engagement, consumer protection, and higher education affordability. As a director of various developmental departments, he has helped oversee multi-million-dollar fundraising campaigns, develop and advocate public policy, and has experience cultivating donors. Sorry for that interruption. To support organizational programs. He has a degree from Arizona State University and is passionate about making a positive difference in our society. He's also a wonderful public speaker and has been known to do some stand-up comedy. I think that was before the pandemic. Also in 2008, he embarked on a life-changing experience, spending the summer working at a sustainable farm in the village of Have, Ghana, where he developed a profound appreciation for environmental conservation. So now he works for the Ocean Foundation and is here to speak to us. Go ahead, Jason.
Great, thank you. Can you all hear me okay? Just a thumbs up? Okay, great. So we have about an hour slotted for our time together, so I'm going to try and get through everything in about 45 minutes, leave time for questions at the end. So I'm Jason D'Onofrio, I'm with the Ocean Foundation. The mission of the Ocean Foundation is to support, strengthen, and promote those organizations dedicated to reversing the trend of destruction to our ocean environments around the world. So the Ocean Foundation is unique in that when we founded ourselves in 2002, we did so as a community foundation, and we are actually the only community foundation for the ocean and coastal communities. So a traditional community foundation would be based around a geography, right? The Arizona Community Foundation or the Community Foundation of New Jersey, and they're focused on that geographical area. For us, our geographical area is the 71% of Earth's surface that's made up by the ocean and the coastal communities that depend on them. So today we host over 50 different projects in addition to our own core initiatives. So if you are an academic institution or a scientific researcher and you don't want to incorporate yourself as your own 501c3, but you still want all of the infrastructure, support, and ability to fundraise, you can be fiscally hosted at the Ocean Foundation. So we host over 50 projects today. Those projects are spread out over 40 different countries around the world on 6 different continents. And so the 3 pillars of the Ocean Foundation are really to serve donors. We do this through donor advice funds, strategic partnerships, and also our own initiatives. Generate new ideas. So there is a new host of threats to the ocean every single year. And so we have to think about how do we stay on top of that and how do we generate new ideas to meet those challenges, and then nurture implementers. So most of the best, most effective work being done to steward the ocean is being done locally, in local communities around the world. And so how do we help support those organizations and nurture those implementers? And then as a community foundation, fiscal management and organizational effectiveness are paramount to every single thing that we do. And so donor transparency, showing everyone where every single dollar goes, we think is critically important to building long-term trust with our community. I mentioned some of those projects that we host. This just gives you kind of an idea that range, everything from tagging bluefin tuna off the coast of New York to working in an indigenous community in Mozambique to sending kids on a field trip to look at whales in San Diego. There's a wide and diverse host of projects that we work with. And then a lot of organizations want to create strategic funds to support an issue. And so the Ocean Foundation is a place where we can set that up. So that's a little bit about us. I know I sort of went through that quickly, but I want to get into the good stuff, the three issues that we're going to talk about today. So the Ocean Foundation runs three core initiatives. In addition to hosting projects, these are the three things that we actually spend our time and our staff work on. The first thing we're going to talk about is something called ocean acidification. Simply put, this is the changing chemistry of our ocean seawater. So the ocean is changing. It is acidifying faster than at any point on the human record. And so this is an initiative we actually launched in 2003 to work with scientists, policymakers, and local communities around the world to monitor our ocean water. The second is something called Blue Resilience Initiative. In the environmental space, you'll hear a lot about the word resilience. What resilience means is the ability to respond. Mostly when we talk about this, how to respond to a natural weather event or something that happens with climate change. So in the case of New Jersey, when Hurricane Sandy hit, resilience would be identified as what is the local infrastructure in place to respond and adapt to that event. And we believe that nature actually poses a lot of solutions that can make our communities more resilient. And then the third issue we'll talk about is plastics, right? This is something that is top of mind for everyone. It is an issue that is getting worse and worse. It's a compounding problem. And so we'll talk a little bit about what we're doing to focus on that. So what is ocean acidification? So a lot of people like to say that ocean acidification is climate change's evil twin. Basically, as we pump carbon dioxide, as we put carbon emissions into the atmosphere, those dissolve. And the carbon emissions that dissolve into our ocean end up altering its chemistry. And we measure that chemistry by measuring the pH of the ocean. And so we are acidifying our ocean faster than at any point on the human record, which has cascading effects to marine life as well as humans. So what is this exactly? Well, as the uptake of carbon dioxide dissolves into the ocean and it alters the chemistry, we have changed it from 8.2 to 8.1. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but seawater is 30% more acidic today than it was 200 years ago. And so why do I show this picture of mussels on the left? Well, because the ecosystem and marine life that this hits first and hardest is shellfish. First of all, when we're talking about ocean acidification, we are talking about changing the environment that marine life live in, right? And so when you make it more acidic, what you're basically doing is you are making the conditions 10 times harder for marine life to develop, to mature, to form their shells, which means they're becoming smaller and smaller or dying altogether, which means it has cascading effects on the food chain, because the fish that eat those are getting smaller and smaller because they have less protein, and the fish that eat those are getting smaller and smaller. So this is devastating the shellfish industry. It is devastating coastal communities in which this type of food provides nutrition for 3 billion people globally. But it also is just making the overall ecosystem of the ocean inhospitable, which also affects things like coral reefs. So this is a picture from National Geographic that shows, all right, let's do a little science experiment. We know how fast the ocean is acidifying. So this is what this is going to be projected in the year 2100. And they said, we'll put a tetrapod in there and we'll see how the shell dissolves over a 45-day period. So day 0, just starting out. Day 16, you can see it's starting to grow. It's starting to form. But then day 31, it completely reverts. And by day 45, it is completely deteriorated. So this is basically showing we will not have conditions for shellfish to thrive and to mature, which will have cascading effects. So pretty doom and gloom, but there is a lot of hope. And so for all of these, I'm going to show there actually are solutions to what is being done. So this picture on the left is actually of an ocean acidification monitoring kit of one of our partners in Myanmar. And so what we have to do first of all is actually study the ocean chemistry. This sounds simple enough. What is the barrier? So the organization that studies this stuff for the United States is called the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA. They have some of the most sophisticated monitoring equipment in the world. The problem is one ocean acidification monitoring kit is $300,000 to $500,000. If you're a scientific institution in Colombia or Mexico or Mozambique or Mauritius, you're not going to spend $500,000 on a piece of equipment that also, if one piece of that equipment breaks, you have to replace the entire thing. They don't have the same kind of federal appropriations process like the United States. So what we did is we worked with a suite of partners during an X Prize to actually strip down this kit to its most basic functions. What do you actually need? And now this kit is $30,000 to $50,000. It's 1/10 the price. And what we did is we shipped 17 of these kits to 16 different countries. This is what that kit looks like in the water on the bottom. And all we asked in return is that they take that data and they put it into an international database, the Global Ocean Acidification Observing Network, so that scientists can actually not just get a local picture of what is happening in our ocean waters, but a global picture, because that's really what we need to understand how to mitigate and adapt to this. So first was providing the equipment. And there's some of our, let me go backwards. There's some of our partners in Palau, I believe, working. So our 4-pronged approach is to first monitor, then analyze, engage with coalitions and stakeholders, and then actually enact legislation that supports science and actually puts in place policies that mitigate ocean acidification. This picture, the gentleman in the center is the Ocean Foundation's president. This woman in the red is also an Ocean Foundation staff member, and the rest of these people are the Mexican Senate delegation. So part of what the Ocean Foundation also does is advise on an international level, helping international governments pass policy that actually helps them monitor their ocean waters and protect their ocean waters, which is the greatest way to mitigate ocean acidification. And so some of the things we've done is, provided draft support to legislators in more than 7 different states to pass ocean acidification legislation, primarily in coastal places like New York, Washington State, California, Oregon. And then we also provide a comprehensive guidebook on legislation that is available so that anyone can use this in an open source way. And then this is a picture of an event we do every single year. This is actually at the New Zealand Embassy, but every year we have an Ocean Acidification Day of Action. So you probably didn't know about ocean acidification before 20 minutes ago. I didn't before I started working at the Ocean Foundation. It's not an issue we talk about very often. And so one of the things we do is we think public education is critically important. So every year in international governments, the way that they do their calendar is they do the day first and then the month. So January would be 8.1. And since that's the current pH of the ocean, on January 8th every year, we host an Ocean Acidification Day of Action to bring together stakeholders, international governments, and community members to focus attention on this issue. So we're going to take a deep breath. I know that was a lot, but basically, before we move into blue carbon or blue resilience, ocean acidification is, again, as we burn fossil fuels, those fossil fuels dissolve into the ocean. They change the chemistry of that ocean. They make it inhospitable for marine life to mature and develop, and they fundamentally alter the marine ecosystem. The only way to really address that is to obviously reduce land-based fossil fuels, but also put in protections for our environment that mitigate against those effects. So one of the tools that we have in our toolbox to fight climate change is something called blue carbon. So in the early 2000s, you probably heard about cap and trade. Cap and trade was a legislative proposal that was basically saying, okay, what do corporations that are polluting care about? They care about money. So, sorry, something came up on Zoom. Can you all still see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So cap and trade was basically saying, okay, if you are a corporation that is polluting, we're not saying you can't pollute, but we're going to put a cap on it. We're going to tax you for the amount of pollution you go over that. And then that evolved into carbon credits. And so there is a carbon marketplace where if you invest in a project that sequesters carbon out of the atmosphere, you can then monetize that, buy and sell those credits on a marketplace. The traditional types of carbon sequestration projects, so these projects that take harmful CO2 gas out of the atmosphere, are mostly methane gas capture. So these projects where we're sucking it out and burying it underground, or terrestrial projects like forestry projects, right? So you hear about the Amazonian rainforest. Trees are a carbon sequestering project, right? Trees are actually sequestering carbon out of the atmosphere. But there's another tool that we have not explored enough that the Ocean Foundation has been focused on since 2008, and that's blue carbon. And obviously blue is referring to the ocean. So blue carbon refers to carbon from the atmosphere that is sequestered through coastal vegetation. What we basically mean by that are seagrasses and mangroves. And so this picture on the right here are pictures of seagrass. So I'm going to go over why seagrasses and mangroves are really our greatest nature tool to fighting climate change. First of all, carbon sequestration. So here's a little statistic that's going to blow your mind. Seagrasses occupy 0.1% of the global ocean seafloor. So 1/10 of 1%. Yet they have 11% of all the organic carbon buried in them. They are remarkably effective at sequestering carbon. Mangroves can sequester, like one mangrove can sequester 15 times more carbon than one tree in the Amazonian rainforest. And part of this is because of their dense root structure and the way that they store it in their biomass and root structure. Coastal protection. So these systems actually help when a hurricane is coming to an island, actually break up the wave energy, actually ward against storms, and then actually protect against flooding. So much so that most hotels in the Caribbean cannot get flood insurance right now. And there are financial products being offered on the marketplace in which insurances offering flood insurance are thinking about giving a premium, a deduction in your monthly premium on your flood insurance policy if you have mangroves on your property. That's how effective they are at warding off flooding. And then in terms of local employment, There was a study done by the Center for American Progress and Oxfam in 2014 that said for every $1 you invest in restoring a mangrove or planting seagrass, you get $15 back in net economic return. Why? Because a healthy coastal ecosystem helps for thriving tourism and it helps for a healthy fishing ecosystem. So this picture on the left is a mangrove. And so it is protection. It is helping to filter the ocean water. It is sequestering carbon, and it is creating a critical fish habitat. You know, it is said that up to 50 million small invertebrate can live in 1 acre of seagrass. So these are critical habitats for these species. So the place that we are actually doing this work is in Puerto Rico. We went there after Hurricane Maria. And so we are in 2 locations, which I think are pretty interesting. One is in Hobos Bay, which is in the southern part of the island. That's the first picture with the dot. And the second one is in Vieques, which is an island about 15, 20 miles off the coast, still technically part of Puerto Rico. And they are home to the brightest bioluminescent bay in the world. And this year they were at risk of losing that bioluminescence because the mangroves were starting to degrade. And so we are working on a project to repair those mangroves and keep that bay healthy. So just wanted to share a couple of pictures with you. These are our partners. So the guy in the top left, his name is Manuel. He is our seagrass expert. What he is doing is he is taking a healthy seagrass and he is fixating on a biodegradable planting unit. And then we're going to plant that in the ground. And it is like a flowering grass like in your backyard and will naturally grow. The pictures below are mangroves that have been planted. And the picture on the bottom right is a dead mangrove. And so he is measuring the length, which tells us a lot about that ecosystem, about the hydrology, about when it died. And then the picture in the top right shows you that even during the pandemic, you can see with them wearing their masks, this work has continued throughout this year, even during COVID-19. Again, there's Mark Martin. He is a local biologist in Vieques. He is studying samples of the bay in their lab in that picture on the bottom. Picture on the top is Mosquito Bay. So this is the brightest bioluminescent bay in the world. And what bioluminescent means is if you go out on this bay and you put your hand in the water, it's going to light up neon because there's these organisms called dinoflagellates that give it this crazy bioluminescence. And so we are restoring mangroves at the mouth of this bay to make sure that we maintain the proper flow of the ocean water that's coming in and out. That's what's keeping the bioluminescence in there. So ocean acidification, we mostly address through providing scientific equipment to monitor and then passing legislation to actually mitigate. When it comes to fighting climate change and carbon emissions, we have these things called seagrasses and mangroves that we can plant all around the world in coastal ecosystems that will protect these communities and also take harmful carbon out of the atmosphere. So our final topic today is going to be plastics. So this group has probably all seen The Graduate with Dustin Hoffman. And if you have, there's a very prophetic scene in there where he's like, I don't know what I should do with my life. And he's like, plastics, kid, it's the future. Yeah, he was not kidding. 50 years of exponential growth in plastic production has created 500 years of durable, persistent pollution. So here's why everyone is freaking out about plastic. When you make plastic, it never goes away. It fundamentally cannot enzymatically degrade. You can burn it, and then you put carcinogens in the atmosphere. You can bury it, and it'll leach into your soil and your groundwater, or you can put it into the ocean, and it will break up into smaller and smaller pieces called microplastics, which fish eat and then we ingest. All of us right now have microplastics in our body. What we don't know is how much we can take before it becomes toxic, and that's what's being studied right now. Over 90% of plastic is not actually recycled because the way that plastic made is too complex. It's too customized. We make a different plastic product for everything. And so you would need an individual recycling center to recycle everything. And then manufacturers mix everything together in proprietary formulas they don't disclose to the public. So you have no idea what Dow Chemical is putting in the 97,000 formulas that they have for the plastic products and synthetics that they're making. The Ocean Foundation's premise is that plastic pollution is not a recycling problem. It is not a consumer problem. It is not even a cleanup problem. It is fundamentally a design problem. This is something that the chemical sciences community has to redesign. We need to strip it down and actually make plastic simple and standardized. And that's what our approach is calling for. So first of all, what is the state of play here? By plastic manufacturers' own estimates, they are going to increase plastic production in the United States by 30% over the next 25 years. Why? How has plastic traditionally been made? Plastic has traditionally been made as a byproduct of petroleum. It's things called nurdles. So when we are burning petroleum to make oil or other kinds of products from that, the byproduct of petroleum becomes the thing we make plastic. But now, with the massive expansion of permits for hydraulic fracking, this is cheaper. Natural gas is cheaper than petroleum. And so this is the fuel that is going to escalate plastic production in the United States. So this is not, we're not reducing our plastic production, we're increasing it. So, the beach cleanups feel nice, but I hate to say it, all of the stuff you cleaned out of the ocean is going to end right back there tomorrow. We have to fundamentally cut it off at the source. And the example we like to give people is, if your bathtub is overflowing, do you turn off the tap or do you grab a towel first? We're saying we got to address the tap. So this is what it's saying. Public awareness campaigns, boycotts, consumer-driven legislation, they have their place, because without those things, the public wouldn't even know that this is a problem, right? If you didn't have the skip the straw campaigns or the 5-cent ban on plastic bags, most people would not even know this is an issue. So those things have their place, but they are not fundamentally addressing the root cause. And then the one thing that we should mention is 90% of the problem is packaging. Single-use plastic packaging. So we need to take a step back. Not all plastic is equal. It has utility. So we are not one of those organizations that says get rid of all plastic. What we are saying is you need to create a hierarchy, a way to have a nuanced, educated conversation about the role of plastic in our society. So we break it into 3 categories. The first part of the hierarchy is inherently hazardous, easily replaceable. So inherently hazardous is polystyrene, styrofoam. That is a known carcinogen. We should get rid of that. Easily replaceable is a plastic bag. We could get rid of plastic bags today, we'd be okay tomorrow. Not a big deal. So that is a category. This is okay, let's get rid of the things that are just redundant, or we have alternatives, or this stuff's just really bad for us and we just shouldn't have it in the first place. Okay, let's get rid of those. But now we move into the second category. These are types of plastics we could get rid of 20, 30 years from now if we invest in research and development, but we cannot get rid of overnight. The example we like to use are the types of plastic that are used to lightweight transportation. So if you get rid of the plastic parts of an airplane, safety issues aside, If you were to replace that with metal, even a light metal like aluminum, the plane is still going to be heavier than with plastic. And now you're going to burn more carbon emissions because you need more fuel. So there's trade-offs to this. So we have to really think strategically, okay, is there an alternative to the plastic we're using on a plane, or is this what we need? So research and development. Third category are the types of plastics that are never going away. And if COVID-19 has taught us anything, sometimes single-use plastic has its efficacy in society. We don't want to reuse vaccine needles. We don't want to reuse, syringes. Prenatal feeding tubes are plastic, right? So there is real utility in the medical profession, as well as some other places where plastic has utility, and we don't want to get rid of it. And so how do we just design it better? So this is a lot. Don't worry about the words on this. Just kind of look at the graphic. So basically, why can't we recycle plastic? Well, as I mentioned, the cap of your, let's just take a plastic water bottle, right? The cap on your water bottle is designed differently than the ring around the mouth of your water bottle, and that's designed differently than the plastic bottle itself. So all three of those things would need 3 different recycling centers. Can't recycle any of the same colors together. Those are different formulas. So what we are saying is, rather than have all of these different complex formulas, what if we just standardized? You still made the water bottle, you still made the Tupperware container, but you used the same formula for each one, and you had maybe 5 different types of plastics instead of 5,000, which is what we have right now. If we standardized it and we streamlined it, then we could design for safety. We could actually recycle it. Why isn't this happening? Well, this isn't happening right now because virgin polymers, new polymers, are way cheaper than Coca-Cola going and getting that bottle back. And so what's happening right now is there's legislation that's been proposed called the Break Free from Plastic Pollution legislation. And it's been reintroduced. And what that gets at is something called extended producer responsibility. Basically saying, if you make the plastic, you have to have some responsibility for what happens once it's out in the wide, wide world. And that will fundamentally alter the value chain, because right now it's just cheaper to make new plastic than reclaim it for these manufacturers. So some of these legislative prescriptions change that calculus. And once these companies have to reclaim it, if they work with the chemical sciences industry, like the Department of Energy and the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, we can come up with a unified way to design plastic. So what can you guys do about this, right? So I talked a lot about the problems. I talked about what we're doing on some of the solutions, but every citizen can take action themselves. So I just did a little research here. These are your 3 state representatives. That's your state senator, your assemblywoman, and your assemblyman, and their phone numbers. Your recycling centers, which is broken into 5 different zones in Holmdel, and then alternatives. And so the first thing is letting your state representatives know that you support a circular economy is helpful, because what happens is recycling is a municipal issue. When people say, like, I wish I could have an impact on the ocean is 71% of the Earth's surface, right? How do I impact something so big, so vast, something that we actually know less about than space? Recycling, you can have a big impact on because it's local. All recycling in the United States is run by the local municipality. And the funding that goes to the recycling centers are basically the last ticket item, right? So they're funding the police, they're funding the schools, they're funding whatever they're funding. And then recycling, because most people don't care about it, is the thing that gets funded last. What happens if you have a poorly funded recycling center in a municipality is that they have less distribution centers to collect this and less ability to process it. So if you actually want to, putting the thing in the blue bin, putting your recycling container in the blue bin is good. But what is better to make sure that that blue bin gets to the right place is contacting your representatives and saying, I care about this issue, and next time this is up for a vote or you're deciding whether or not to provide resources, I would like my recycling center well resourced, because they are one of the most under-resourced municipal agencies in the United States. And if you want to see a really good movie about this that goes into it, there's a movie called The Story of Plastic. And it really dives into it. And there's a scene where there's just this poor guy at a municipal recycling center standing in front of a wall of his town's plastic. And, if they just had a little bit more resources, there's things that they could do to address it. So that's one of the first things you can do. And then alternatives are good. I just tell everyone, look at the alternatives where and when you can. That does make a difference. If you have millions of people in the United States making incremental changes in their life, this does have a big impact. And one example I'll share is we have a partnership with Marriott International, the hotel chain. They're the second largest hotel chain in the world, and they're trying to increase their sustainability. And one thing they did is they eliminated all single travel size use plastics in their hotels, which the customers freaked out over, right? And they opted for industrial size, fixed to the shower with anti-tampering units on, right? So to make it safe, but so everyone's basically reusing the same thing. And they have the amount of plastic that they are now eliminating annually is insane, right? Just that one little change. And so we can all make those changes in our own life. And the last thing I would say is, if there's any boaters out there, jet skiers, stay out of the shallow waters, because that's where seagrass grows. And the number one threat to seagrass is boats get into too shallow of water, they get stuck, they rev their propeller, and they create divots in the ocean floor, which then prevents seagrass from naturally growing. So stay out of the shallow waters, choose plastic alternatives. And then my information is here. If anyone has any questions, please take my number down and my email. This is also the Ocean Foundation's website, which has all of this information on it as well. So I'm going to turn things back over to you now for any questions that you all might have.
I have a question. Jason, can you hear me?
Yes.
So has the Biden administration picked up on some of your initiatives? Are they supporting you?
Yeah, so I don't know that there's been a US president in American history that even knows really what the ocean is, to be perfectly honest. And I don't even mean that in a facetious way, but the Obama administration had zero things on the ocean until sixth year into his administration. The Green New Deal mentions the ocean once in a fleeting passage. And while Biden has made some very promising strides, like rejoining the Paris Climate Agreement and making significant commitments to reducing the United States emissions by 2030 and again by 2050, they have not, beyond supporting the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which is a government agency, there's not a lot of attention on the ocean. And that's a big problem, because the ocean is the world's largest carbon sink. It's our greatest tool to fight climate change, and it's also our greatest climate regulator. But unfortunately, the ocean is a difficult issue for politicians because there's no defined constituency. So the way that the ocean works is you get 200 nautical miles offshore, and then it's high seas, international waters. No one governs it. Can't get any votes for it. And something that's pretty crazy is that 2/3 of the ocean are high seas, meaning they're not governed by anyone. 3/4 of the earth is the ocean. That means half of the earth is lawless. Literally half of the earth has no laws anywhere. So that is why a lot of politicians haven't cared about it, because One is it does get a little bit tricky with when you talk about commercial fishing rights and trade and shipping, which are usually counter to conservation, as well as the fact that there's no real defined constituencies. The ocean unfortunately gets left out. But we are hopeful that Biden will address it in other ways, like supporting climate action, which then will signal to us ocean groups, there may be more funding available for us to go after. And certainly now that we've rejoined Paris, we can participate on the international stage more effectively.
Thank you.
Liz, you can go ahead, and then after Liz, we'll do Janice and Bob.
I have a,
She
Oh.
said after Liz.
She's muted. Oh, there you go.
I'm ready. I'm ready. And I'm embarrassed to tell you that I can't remember the acronym for this latest funding initiative by the Biden administration. But I know, for example, in our community, they got $1 million, which is supposed to, I don't remember what it's supposed to support, but I know it's very wide ranging. And I understand that, all of our neighboring communities have gotten big chunks of money. So what I'm wondering is this money that can be used to supplement our recycling and environmental commitments?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I wouldn't be able to answer that unless I knew the specific.
What the funding source
Yeah.
was? CD, do you know? Is CD here?
it-
Or Regina? I mean,
Are you
Holmdel
talking
got
about
$1
the
million.
American,
Are
you talking about the American Rescue Plan?
That's what I can't remember, Regina, maybe.
I think that's it. Yes.
Uh-huh.
So for the American Rescue Plan, probably not, but the infrastructure bill, yes, absolutely. And so one of the things to look for, particularly during reconciliation, is when Obama passed his infrastructure bill, he called for coastal restoration projects, and they put something like, I think, 100 million in, but they got like 3 billion in requests. And so that got carried over in HR2, Move America Forward Act, which the House has passed. And a piece of that is going to be put into reconciliation. And there's going to be billions for coastal infrastructure projects, which will get at some of those nature-based solutions. For recycling centers, absolutely, the infrastructure package hasn't been debated yet, right? But this is absolutely something that they're talking about, is how do we support local municipal infrastructure? And one thing that is also critically important, maybe even more important than recycling, to be honest, is there is a Flint, Michigan everywhere in the United States, meaning our pipes are incredibly old and incredibly outdated and corroded. And water is the most precious commodity for our health, for our crops, for everything. And so I would, if you're a concerned citizen, also look in the infrastructure plan to your local community. What does your infrastructure look like? And should your member of Congress or state representative be fighting for dollars to get to your community to support infrastructure? Because this is the only time to do it. When we're talking about like lead piping, okay, not only is this incredibly hazardous, this is the type of money you can only secure in an infrastructure bill as large as the one that's being proposed right now, the 1.9 trillion. This is not something that could ever be done locally.
Right.
So that's really where I would look. And then, yes, you should call for support for municipal recycling centers as well, but definitely for your water and piping infrastructure. And that's something your member of Congress should fight for, and would be a good win for them to bring home to their district.
Okay.
Janice and Bill?
a quick comment, if I may. You showed the picture, Jason, of the mussels that were all apparently dead. And there are an effort in New Jersey to replenish the oyster beds.
Yes.
And I'm familiar with the fact that they're a filtering system. All the shellfish are. And maybe that's because they're filtering all this crap that we're dumping into the ocean. That's why they're dying. But can you just educate me a bit on the number of gallons these these shellfish filter for us? That's one comment I would like you to address. And then more recently, the Manhattan or bunker are dying all along our ocean shores. They're in the marina, they're flapping, they're up to the surface. And of course, they're studying, they don't know why they're dying, but you mentioned they're all the fish are eating these microscopic plastics.
Yeah.
and and then finally, I'll let somebody else jump in. I've been boating since '84, so that's a long time. And one of the real serious problems that I see as a boater and somebody that loves the ocean is that every now and then we will hear raw sewage is being dumped in. We don't know how many thousands of gallons. And guess what? All the water, all the filter, all the water drainage from the city streets and even in Holmdel, guess where they all go? Out to the ocean
Yep.
or the Raritan Bay.
Yep. Okay, so yeah, I'll do these in a row. So on the oysters, yes, they have natural filtration ability. And so your point is very astute because many of you have probably seen this. If you go to New York, they have the Billion Oyster Project. So if you go to New York City or if you went there before COVID and you ate at a restaurant and you got oysters, that restaurant would keep those shells and they would donate it to this program, which is run through the school system in New York. And they put those shells back into the Hudson River to help the oyster population regenerate. And they have a goal of putting 1 billion oysters in the bay to filter the pollution. So yes, that is exactly what they are trying to achieve. And it's been a really remarkable program because it's run through the school system. So now you're not only doing direct conservation, but you're doing direct education, right? So these kids in like inner city schools in New York City are learning about ocean ecosystems. It's pretty cool. So they have real remarkable qualities. And then you might have heard a lot about aquaculture. So the United States is only 1% of the global aquaculture market. China is like 85%. But what is a big thing is this isn't necessarily fish farms. What this is sustainable aquaculture, not on land, in the ocean, but controlled systems. So they're basically saying now to your second point, we're putting so much bio waste. Agricultural runoff actually is one of the #1 threats. So I'm in DC. What almost killed the Chesapeake Bay were algal blooms, harmful algal blooms. That's what causes red tide in Florida. Is this nitrogen loads from farms when the agricultural runoff goes straight in to the bay. So sustainable aquaculture now is being pursued where they're saying we need to control the environment. And so if we can just have these fixed systems with a healthy ecosystem where we're filtering the water and we're maintaining that, then can we actually just grow healthy food? And can we eliminate plastics being in there as well? So you are going to hear a lot about sustainable aquaculture over the next 10, 20 years as we continue to pollute our oceans because we need these like controlled environments. It's like akin to organic farming where people are moving away from factory farming and saying, we need open grazing, grass fed, no antibiotics. That's basically sustainable aquaculture. And so that's something that's being pursued right now. Plastics is a real issue, obviously, for all the reasons I mentioned, but also there's not a lot of toxicology studies. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get a study funded that someone came to us, a toxicologist came to us, who wants to do the first ever real toxicology study where he is going to take blubber and skin samples from whales in the Pacific and the Atlantic. and then use that with other data available and see what is the degree of microplastics that exist to start to give us an idea. But yeah, this is a real problem, and another problem that we don't talk a lot about, but that we're working to address is, 30% of the plastic in the ocean is delinquent fishing gear. So it's fishing lines that have broken, or it's crabbing pots that have been cut away, or it's fishing poles that have been lost. And so that's a terrible thing. At the same time, that's very solvable, right? And so people are finding alternatives to those types of fishing lines and those fishing practices. And then your third question, so that was plastics, oysters, and then the third one.
I mentioned the oysters as filtration. I
Yeah.
mentioned the
Oh, the bio
or-
waste. Yeah. So
the drainage.
that is, as I mentioned, that is a real thing where, yes, bio waste, it goes into the ocean, and also agricultural runoff. And now, this is really scary, but Japan, I don't know if anyone saw this, but their nuclear waste plant that went offline all those years ago, in 2 years, they're going to dump that into the ocean because they don't know what to do with it. So this is also the argument against nuclear. It's like, yes, it can be safe and it is cleaner, but then there's, what do you do with it in the end? And they're going to dump that straight into the ocean, which is going to destroy that ecosystem. And the poorer countries around Japan are freaking out because they depend on a healthy fishing economy. And so, Japan is a more diversified economy, and so they're not as worried about it. But that's going to happen in 2 years. So we can't keep dumping into the ocean. That is a real issue.
How do you maintain a positive attitude with all this?
Well, yeah. So I get to work with a lot of local communities, and I'll be going to Puerto Rico in June to visit our local project, and that's really what keeps me and all of us going, is like seeing the actual work. And I think a lot of times, like, communities in Puerto Rico, for example, get portrayed as vulnerable or victims, when in reality, they are the most resilient of any communities. And so, yes, they wish that there would be smarter policy. They wish that the United States would maybe treat them more like citizens than they do, but they're not wallowing in the despair of that. They're figuring out ways to work with the community and respond. And to see people embrace these local solutions, like, the solutions are out there. If there were no solutions, then maybe it would be hopeless, but we actually have tools at our disposal. So seeing people implement them, I think, is pretty inspiring.
Thank you.
Regina, you can go ahead and unmute.
I didn't know if it was my turn. First, I want to say that I'm very impressed, and if you could speak a little bit more about how you have lobbyists everywhere around the world to work with governments on these issues. And I'd also like to know what you said about contacting our state legislators, since they are giving money to the municipalities. I can understand contacting them, but it's really the municipalities that are making up the budgets for the recycling. So shouldn't we be going to our local governments as far as asking for funds?
Yes. And so that's exactly right. And those people I put up on the screen, and I'll send this presentation. I actually sent it, Michelle, so you can circulate it around. Those are your state representatives. Yes. And so they would decide during your state legislature or your general assembly. So absolutely.
No, but it's the municipality that, it's their budget that decides on how much recycling to do, no?
It is, but it is also state funding, right? Because the
Okay,
state
so both.
decides how the overall state budget gets broken down to municipality. But yes, you should go to your city council or your general assembly as well. You should do both. And
Okay.
then for the federal bills, which will give you real money, then go to your member of Congress. So we have local projects around the world, and we work with governments around the world. And this is, I'll say three things about this. Number one, as I mentioned with the Japan example, what happens to the ocean is really all about international cooperation.
Mm.
So there was a Save Our Seas 2.1, and then this year there was Save Our Seas 2.0. But everything that happens in the ocean is basically predicated on international cooperation. So when we talk about the United States having good relationships with other countries, the ocean, there may not be a greater consequence of how good or not those relationships are than the ocean, because that impacts our, when we talk about trade, a lot of that trade occurs over open ocean waters, and who's polluting where, that all is about international cooperation. One we focus on is in 2015, the Paris Climate Agreement was passed, and underneath that was something called Nationally Determined Contributions, NDCs. At the same time, the United Nations adopted something called the Sustainable Development Goals. There are 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So the ocean is number 14. It's called Life Below Water, but they have ones on climate action, on food and agriculture, on ending poverty, on education, right? They have these 17 sustainable goals. And they're basically saying if we want to live in a world that isn't on fire and that is just and equitable and healthy, these are the 17 areas we have to take action. And what Paris says is, here is my nationally determined contribution that I will do to help you meet those 17 sustainable goals. So that is the conversation the United States has not been in for the last 5 years, is this is what I will do to address climate. This is what I will do to address ocean. This is what I will do to end child poverty. And everyone makes those commitments at these things called Conference of the Party, COP. So COP26 is going to happen this year in November. So one of the things the Ocean Foundation does is we will work with these governments to say, what do you think you can do? How can we help you write your nationally determined contributions to be ambitious but achievable? And so what does that look like? Is that a 20% reduction in carbon emissions over 30 years? Is that protecting 30% of your land and ocean by 2030? And so that's the kind of consulting we do, is helping them set these countrywide goals that meet our global goals. And then sometimes we help them implement it. So if they say we want to protect 30% of our ocean, then we would help them draft legislation that they could actually pass to do that.
And are most countries in the world part of this?
Yeah, so the only industrialized countries that were not in Paris were the United States, Vietnam, Iran, and Afghanistan. It's a great company for us to be in terms of, that's the company the former president was keeping in terms of pulling out. So those countries are not in, but every other country is in. There's like 170 countries in. So, we finally joined the party.
Yeah.
And what was crazy is,
sorry,
we actually couldn't withdraw from Paris until the day after the 2020 election. But because the former president signaled that we were going to withdraw, it put a gag order on all of the diplomats in the United States from having those conversations. So this year is a big deal. And what Biden just did on Earth Day last week is he convened 40 countries for a virtual international summit to say, we're back to the party. These are the commitments we're going to make. And you're going to see a lot of those commitments be made throughout this summer.
Okay, I have one more question.
Yeah.
Are you working with, for instance, Clean Ocean Action is very big around protecting here, as far as protecting the Jersey Shore. They've been around since the 80s, basically. And also universities.
Yeah, so I don't think we have a direct relationship with Clean Ocean Action, but maybe we should. They sound like they're doing great work. And then, yes, we have lots of relationship with universities. In fact, that's where most of our ocean acidification work happens, is we're equipping US academic institutions, but mostly international academic institutions like the University of Mauritius, for instance, and working with those universities who, you know, you have budding PhD scientists who now can use that equipment. They can advance their degree while also doing this scientific research. So that is a key partner of ours for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just say thank you, Jason, so much for your presentation. It was wonderful, clear. We're so happy you were able to join us today.
Yes, thank you. And let me give a shout out to you all for spending an hour of your time with me, because the reason the Ocean Foundation formed as a community foundation in 2002 instead of as an NGO that focused on one particular issue is because if you look at the philanthropic giving categories in the United States, environment is dead last at number 9. If you go into that, the ocean is less than 5% of environmental funding. So it's less than 5% of the least giving category, but it makes up 71% of the Earth's surface. And it's not just philanthropy. As I mentioned, it's not something that the administration pays a lot of attention to or that people really know a lot about. And now, if you look at all of where the billionaires are putting their money, they're going to space. They bypassed ocean exploration and they're going straight to space, which I have wonder of space too. Don't get me wrong, it's very exciting, but we still do not know a lot about the ocean. And so just taking an hour out of your day to learn more about it is really refreshing for us. It's why we exist as a community foundation. So I'm very, very grateful for your time and attention to this. And we hope more and more people, you know, just take the time to learn about this incredible ecosystem that gives life to all of us. So it is said that every other breath of life you take is because of the ocean. So it's good that we're focused on it.
Jason, do you have any kind of connection with PBS at all? Because I've been watching a lot of documentaries on environmental things in the past year, and they've done some beautiful work. I mean, I'm sure that you would love to be part of that so you can get
Sure.
the word out. But I was wondering if that effort has been put toward.
Yeah, they have. They've shown things, and we've put out films and lots of books on it. We don't have a direct relationship with them, but we love when they cover us, and we do try and get them and other news outlets to cover us as much as we can. Yeah.
Okay. Do you have these things available for the school systems?
Yeah, so one of our projects actually focuses on that, on providing field trips to take students whale watching. And that's like the whole reason of their nonprofit existing. So we try and get into the schools and educate kids young too.
That's a good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm from Maryland, so I'm very familiar about what you spoke about with the Chesapeake Bay.
Yeah, exactly.
And they have very many problems still with what's happening in the bay. And
They
I'm
do,
hoping,
but you also hit on a good note for us to close. You want a happy note because you mentioned the Chesapeake Bay. So 10 years ago,
yeah,
every summer,
made
a third of the
improvements.
bay is dead, literally a dead zone.
That's
That's
right.
not the case anymore. They rehabbed it. And here's a really cool project that they did. One of the things that was hurting the bay is that because of the tide shifting, crabbers in the winter, because the tides were lower, were dredging their crabbing pots along the ocean floor and ripping up the ecosystem and the seagrass beds. And so the bay wanted to get these crabbers to stop crabbing, but you can't just wipe out someone's livelihood. So they also realized that there were hundreds of thousands of delinquent crabbing pots from the hundreds of years that people have been crabbing stuck in the bay. So they took money from the Chesapeake Bay Trust and they bought sonar equipment and they fixed it on these crabbers' boats, and they paid them to not crab, but instead to go collect crabbing pots. And they removed over 40,000 crabbing pots in one
Wow.
summer. They got paid and the bay came back. So these solutions are out there. We just have to pay attention to them.
That is good news.
Yes. Well, thank you all for your time. I really, really appreciate it. And then Michelle, feel free to circulate my information and this PowerPoint presentation to anyone that wants it.
Yes, thank you all for coming. The recording will be made available on social media. I will also send the slides out to everybody who's here. Please feel free to share. And thank you, Jason, for giving us this talk. The environmental group will certainly continue this conversation through the years to come. Thank you so much for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jason.
You.
That's my nephew. Woo.